Hello, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitch, and I'm not. Oh, there I am. Well, that was fun. All right, let me start over. Hello, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, Periscope, and I know I'm forgetting somebody else. Of course, YouTube. How could I forget YouTube? Although the algorithm seems to do a pretty good job of forgetting me. But bump. My name is Frank Lavinia, and today I am going to cover quantum computing. I'm going to try to do it in 15 minutes or less. Let's see, maximize myself. My name's Frank Lavinia. I am a data and AI architect, quantum computing enthusiast, podcaster, vlogger, live streamer, I guess. Yeah, I guess I am. How meta is that, right? You can catch me on Twitter at Frank Diggs Data, and one day, I hope to be a member of the Cool Kids Club and be on Clubhouse. All right, so let me pull this up and unmaximize myself. There I am. Let me get rid of the chat graphics because that's taking up a lot of screen real estate. There we go. All right. I will be monitoring the chat in the other window. So earlier or late last week, I was supposed to give a presentation on quantum computing. However, the customer kind of unceremoniously kind of canceled the meeting. And I was excited. I ain't going to lie. I was disappointed, though, because I do love talking about quantum computing. All right. So, however, I do have a hard stop at 5 p.m. East or maybe 5:02. So this is going to be a quick overview. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do it again. Thanks for watching. I see I'm building an audience. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Maybe I could do part 2 tomorrow. But why quantum computing, right? Well, there's a lot of challenges the world faces right now. There's climate change. There's food production, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that is pretty interesting to me, particularly the food production one, is how plants work in terms of how they can extract nitrogen from the air. This is known as the nitrogen cycle or nitrogen fixation, is that they can take nitrogen from the air and process it in a way that the plant can use it. Now, it takes a lot of energy for us to produce fertilizers that have nitrogen that can do this. But plants can do it. Seeds can do it. Little tiny seeds, they can do it. How can they do it? There's also climate change, right? In terms of modeling climate or antibiotic resistance or material science, right? How can we make better materials that have less impact on the environment, have better kind of designs of what we want to do? Ultimately, the ability to pattern molecules down at the atomic level, turns out it's actually pretty hard. And ultimately, thus far, these problems have been intractable, which means that the bigger the molecule or the how that works is that ultimately, the more atoms you get, the harder they are to model because of various reasons in terms of how many states each one of the electrons can be. So we really don't have an idea, in a sense, of being able to model how new drugs would interact, or how antibiotics would work, or how viruses can be controlled and contained. Both, and right now, the solid line represents classical computing where we are now. Even in the future, you think the chips are going to get faster. They are going to get faster, but they're not going to get that much faster. So ultimately, the goal is to have quantum computing. This could solve it. Because of the way they work, or basically the same way, and in the different states of uncertainty, and is basically how quantum computers work, right? They work on the same principles. Optimization is another problem, right? You think about the traveling salesman problem, salesperson problem, like whatever you want to use, right? How do you find the global minimum, right? As opposed to any one of the other local ones, right? This is a very real problem that can solve. So here's a video on quantum computing. I will share a link to it. But ultimately, how it works is that it runs the entire maze at once. Now, this isn't, bear with me here. So classical computers would, hey, where's my animation working, right? It would try each one of these options here to eventually find a solution that works. Quantum computing works by, come on, is it going to show the animation? Man. All right. So what that was meant to show is that it would try every solution and then find at once. It doesn't really find anything. The analogy there kind of does break down. And there's a lot of analogies that's just, you can only go but so far with an analogy. So I want to talk about my favorite magazine, and it's been a subject of my live streams quite a bit, Omni Magazine. So Omni Magazine was a magazine in the 80s. And come on. It was a magazine in the 1980s, late 70s, early 90s. And it was really about science fiction, and kind of weird fringe science too, right? Science, imagination in the future. I think that pretty much covers it. You're going to hear another story about Omni Magazine soon. But one of the things they would have is they would have puzzle, right? There was usually a puzzle. Usually it was tied to an ad. You know, think Ralphie in A Christmas Story. You know, be sure to drink your Ovaltine. But there was this one puzzle that kind of stuck with me. I still remember it to this day, and it was basically if you look at old-fashioned telephones, they have letters next to the numbers, and this was basically the idea that you would take a particular message. This was not the original message, but this is the one I created, and basically they said you would work through every possible combination, and it would take you maybe 30 minutes to solve, right? It was a longer puzzle than this. Now my 12-year-old brain was like, oh, interesting. So as I started writing out, it was all about how the information was presented. So I just wrote out on a sheet of paper, basically this, like what each number corresponded to, these three letters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I realized the answer presented itself, right? You can even see it. Data is the new oil, right? So this is a good analogy because it really shows is that, well, it shows a couple things. One, data, how you visualize a problem, how you see a problem impacts your ability to solve it, right? Secondly, it shows kind of that whole notion of, it doesn't so much try everything at once, but you definitely, because you have the ability to search through all of these options all at once, you have because you can sort through more answers faster, or more potential answers faster, you definitely narrow down the time. So I solved the problem that was supposed to take 15 to 30 minutes. I did it in about as long as it took me to write down the numbers and letters. And I felt rather proud of myself for that. That is a good analogy for quantum computers. Quantum computers are built on something called qubits. And it's very interesting how they work. And I see I'm coming up on my time, so maybe this will be a teaser for the next stream. We live in kind of the normal world, although some people would say I don't live in the normal world, and that's okay. I live on Frank's World, franksworld.com. This is our normal world, and that normal classical physics can define anything for how a baseball will fly through the air, how it will react when it gets hit by a baseball bat, to the orbits of the moon and planets and other things like that. If you look at all of this was uncovered by Sir Isaac Newton hundreds of years ago. The problem comes is when you start getting into quantum mechanics. Once you get beyond a certain size, once you get down to the atomic and subatomic level, things don't work the way we expect them to, right? They don't work on the way that we've become accustomed to as entities, beings, animals, whatever word you want to use. If I throw a baseball and it hits the wall, it's going to make a noise, might even dent the wall. But I know that it's not going to go through the wall, right? Unless I throw it really hard. Most of the time, it's going to bounce off and it's going to make a noise and probably ruin the paint or whatever. With quantum mechanics, there's a number of properties that are unique at this scale. And that might be, because of the time, all I can cover. But I want you to walk away with the notion that qubits essentially are not like classical bits. Classical bits essentially represent the flow of electricity, right? Electricity is flowing or it's not. If it's not flowing, it's a value 0. If it's flowing, it's a value of 1. Quantum kind of has the same notion of 0 and 1, right? Up and down for an electron spin. Turns out there's different ways to measure a qubit. But they also have this something called superposition, right? And it's basically a combination of the 0 and 1 state. And I never really got this through my head until it was actually about a year ago. I was at attending a talk, and the guy did an awesome job of explaining it. And I'll try to get to that slide. So if you think back to the movie No Country for Old Men, there's a scene where this guy is subtly making a hint that he's threatening to kill this guy and his family. But it's all on the roll of a dice. Flip of a coin, not roll of a dice. So while it was in the air, both outcomes were equally likely until it collapsed. Now, there is some math ahead, and I may have to stop at this point, but ultimately, and spoilers if you want to watch the full show later, you are not adding numbers, right? So the whole notion of like 0 plus 1 equals superposition. No, I learned in kindergarten that 0 plus 1 is 1. Any number plus 0 is the same number. How does that work? Well, it turns out you're not really adding integers. You're adding matrices, right? So ultimately, if 0 is represented by this, not matrix, I'm sorry, vectors, you're adding vectors, right? If I add this would be the state of 1, and this would be the state of 0. If I add them together, boom. That's how you add 0 plus 1 and get an answer other than 1, ultimately. That, and this right here, this was my aha moment where I was like, bam, right? It all made sense to me. I mean, for a second, I think I understood the universe, but the notion is that you're not adding integers, you're adding vectors. And that opens up a whole new realm of possibility, doesn't it? So with that, it is 5:01 p.m. here on the East Coast. I want to thank you for watching. You can catch me on Twitter at Frank Diggs Data and franksworld.com, datadriven.tv, and Impact Quantum Podcast. I will return another day tomorrow to maybe do a fuller version of this. Sorry, I had to cut it short. Have to run a rather important errand for the family, which I just found out about. So I swear one of these days I will get around to scheduling these things so that it's a little bit more organized. But with that, I want to say thank you for watching live. Let me see if I have any comments in the chat. No comments in the chat. You have a fantastic Thursday.